Our political leaders, policymakers and thinkers from the US and Australia are brainstorming together here in Canberra over the next 2 days with a heavy focus on the AUKUS military alliance. Behind closed doors, they're sharing insights into laws that need to be passed and, of course, steel that needs to be cut so this country can get up to 3 second-hand Virginia-class submarines from the US Navy. Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher is among US politicians trying to clear the way for AUKUS. He's also the chairman of the US House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. He's been speaking on the sidelines of the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue. To Afternoon Briefing's Greg Jennett, it's his first Australian interview here in Parliament House.
Mike Gallagher, welcome back to Australia. Welcome, I think, to Canberra for the first time. Bit of ground to cover with you today, but why don't we start out, first of all, with your interest in and association with Australia. You chair the AUKUS caucus, the Friendship Caucus with Australia. What is that association? Where did it begin?
Well, it began when I first got elected in 2017, when the Australian Embassy at the time asked me if I would be willing to co-chair it with my good friend, a Democrat named Joe Courtney. And I jumped at the opportunity. As someone who served in the Marine Corps in Iraq, one of the most powerful things I got to see was us working hand in hand with our closest allies. And we have no closer ally than the Australians and the Brits. And so from a military perspective, I understood the importance of the alliance. And so the opportunity to expand upon that and do it from a legislative perspective was really a rewarding one. And I just love Australia.
Okay, so just to be clear, it wasn't that our national colours are green and gold and the Green Bay Packers just happened to be.
That influenced the decision, that the Wallabies colours are the same as the Green Bay Packers, that I love R.M. Williams boots, and that my daughter is obsessed with the Wiggles. So all of these things conspired to convince me.
All right, well, you've come suitably attired. Why don't we move on to AUKUS, because there is a discussion happening in Congress about all the necessary legislation to make it happen. You've described in another place strong bipartisan support for this. How fragile is that, though? Can the necessary legislation be passed in short order?
I think it can. I think we are making serious progress when it comes to reforms necessary to break down the barriers to collaboration between the U.S. and Australia. ITAR reform is the phrase you hear. I think we can get there, even in divided government. I think we can get to a place where we're making a bigger investment in our own submarine industrial base so that we don't have to choose between selling the Aussie subs versus satisfying our own needs. That shouldn't be a choice. We can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think we can get there. Everything gets harder politically the closer you get to the 2024 election. So we'll have to navigate that. But the good news is it is a deep reservoir of support in the United States Congress. I work hand in glove with Joe Courtney on the Select Committee on China. Democrats, Republicans see eye to eye on this issue. So this isn't necessarily a partisan issue. It's just a matter of putting our energy into getting something across the finish line before this Congress expires. When
you talk about the industrial base, keeping up the production rate of nuclear-powered submarines in America, how much of that comes down to dollars? Might it be necessary for Australia to contribute more than it's currently indicated, which is about $3 billion Australian dollars?
Well, certainly in America, we appreciate the substantial investment that Australia is making. I think even more than just the raw dollar amount, what it comes down to is a demand signal. What we need from the Pentagon in the U.S. is a clear demand signal in terms of here is the shipbuilding plan over the next 10 to 30 years. Here's where we're going to do all the work. And then the industrial base will respond to that clear plan. And then in America, we need to break the prioritization. Usually we have an equal one-third, one-third, one-third split between the various services. The Navy needs to take priority because the Indo-Pacific is a priority theater. That theater has a lot of water in it, and therefore the Navy is the priority force. So if we do that and surge resources to our Navy, I think then we can ascertain the level of investment Australia needs to make, and then we start to unlock a lot of efficiencies in the defense industrial base. There needs to be that long-term certainty in terms of the investment we need to make.
As you pull this apart, is it yet clear to you what the sale price will be for a Virginia submarine?
Well, what do they usually cost? We do a block buy of 2 for $9 billion, so they're usually $4.3 billion in terms of what we pay to buy them. Who knows what that number is going to be when we get to the point where they're actually going to transfer the first 2. And I believe the plan now is to transfer the first 2 that are after a midlife extension. So that wouldn't be the price you'd pay for a brand new Virginia class. But the theory is if we start building more, right? Right now we're supposed to be building 2 a year. We're delivering about 1.4. We need to get it up to 2.5. Then you start to achieve efficiencies and savings, and that price, that per unit price, goes down. And so that's where we need to get to.
Now, there are other dimensions to AUKUS, of course, and you've spoken about it as an entity, AUKUS, having to get on a war footing, adopt a war footing were your words. Do you assess that Australia and the US, in relation to China, are yet on a war footing?
No, I don't think we're moving quick enough. And I'll just speak for America right now. My sense is we are not moving heaven and earth to surge hard power west of the international date line to the Indo-Pacific. And that's important because if you believe there's a serious risk that Xi Jinping could attempt to take Taiwan by force, the best way to prevent that is to put hard power in his path so as to make his ambition impossible to achieve. So we need long-range precision fires in key locations. What Ukraine has also taught us is that we can quickly expend those fires, so they need to be stockpiled and pre-positioned, and right now we're just not doing that. And that is the dilemma, right? You need to mobilize the industrial base as if we're preparing for war so as to avoid war. It's not easy. It's going to require leadership in both Canberra and Washington, D.C., but I think we can get there with the right leadership.
So you see a role for Australia in this. You've given an example of some war games conducted around a Taiwan scenario for the US, where stocks of some critical munitions were exhausted, correct me if I'm wrong, in about 6 days. From that, you see a role for production onshore here in Australia. At what scale? Is this a niche volume contribution by Australia or something substantial?
Well, I think particularly when it comes to undersea innovation, autonomous undersea vehicles, Australia can really play a leading role. I mean, we've had some exciting partnerships between new American defense companies like Anduril and Australian entities. So there I see a whole host of opportunities, both in the undersea domain and when it comes to loitering munitions. You guys have some really exciting technology that we could actually profit from. When it comes to investing in advanced energetics, those are the things that we put inside of our missiles, the explosives, propellants, and pyrotechnics. There, Australia can really help us out. So I think we're limited only by our own imagination. Politically, where it gets more difficult, and I want to be sensitive to the politics here in Australia, is when you talk about positioning sort of intermediate range missiles in the northern territories of Australia. It would have to involve complete sovereign control by Australia for that to be possible, but that would create a serious defense dilemma for Xi Jinping. I guess the broader principle at play here is we just need to be on the same page with Australia when it comes to what we're doing to prevent a war, and ultimately we have to fight a war.
This positioning of intermediate range weapons is on the table. It is being discussed to the best of
I don't think
knowledge.
it was discussed at Osman. I know that the previous Secretary of Defense, Esper, had come to Australia in 2019, and he made the suggestion, and it created a bit of controversy here in Australia. So again, I want to emphasize that for it to be possible, it would have to be sovereign control. I will say we've come a long way since 2019, just in terms of AUKUS. So my vision would be that we leverage the non-submarine parts of AUKUS to really do a crash program when it comes to relatively low-cost, long-range precision fires that could make it very difficult for the PLA to invade Taiwan. That's sort of your near-term hedging strategy. At the same time, you await the long-term promise of AUKUS in the form of nuclear attack subs.
Okay, leave that with us. We'll take up questions with the Australian government on that. Finally, Mike Gallagher, in recent decades, I might observe that Australia probably hasn't enjoyed a more supportive administration or legislature than it does in Washington right now. You've already referenced that there is an election year coming up. Why should Australia assume that in the event of a second Trump presidency, that cooperation, even AUKUS itself, will continue?
Because in our system of government, power transcends the presidency. In many ways, the framers designed our Constitution to make Article 1, the legislative branch, the dominant branch of government. Now, in modern times, the presidency has grown more powerful, but regardless of who occupies the office of the presidency, there is going to remain that deep reservoir of support for the U.S.-Australia alliance. And I'm confident that with Republicans and Democrats working together, that we can do what is necessary to make sure that we deliver on AUKUS and really deliver on the promise of all of the things that fall under AUKUS.
So do you see your current role as a lawmaker to Trump-proof this alliance?
Well, who knows what Trump would do? And I think Trump actually deserves credit for changing the focus in D.C. on China. I mean, we witnessed the biggest change in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War under the Trump administration. Now, it could also be said that Trump was desperate for a trade deal with Xi Jinping. My own view is that we should seek someone younger as the nominee for the Republican Party. So we'll see what happens in the Republican Party. But regardless of Trump, Biden, whoever's the president, there are certain things we need to do prior to the 2024 election to get AUKUS moving, to remove the barriers to collaboration. And I mean, look at the history of our alliance, right? It's survived any number of presidencies, any number of crises. We fought together in every major war, and we have genuine friendships. I mean, some of my closest friends are legislators here in Australia, and so I think that gives me hope that no matter which way the political winds blow, we'll be able to do what we need to do together. Well,
here today, and I know over a broader sweep of time through the Australian-American leadership dialogue, you're playing your role here and elsewhere. Mike Gallagher, really appreciate your time spent with us today, and enjoy the rest of your stay in our country.
Thank you very much.